Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here nice and early on a Tuesday morning. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to have a coffee and a tea and a little bit of breakfast, but if not, don't worry, they will all be here after this morning's session, so there will be time. My name's Alex. For those of you who I haven't met, it's lovely to have you here this morning. Lots of familiar and new faces, so thank you all for making the time to be here this morning. I would like to start by acknowledging that Talking Point is being held on the lands of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay deep respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we extend that respect to any First Nations folk with us here today. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. We are grateful to be on this country and part of a great tradition of storytelling and connection in this place. So, as we can see, we have a fantastically diverse and broad community of organisations and people here with us this morning. Here's just a little bit of a sense of how many people we have in the room. So thank you all for being here. This is what makes these sessions so special. It's all of you being here with us, sharing and connecting. So thank you. We really appreciate it. We acknowledge that it is quite early in the morning, so thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Terrific to be here. I think we've well and truly got the talking wheels greased there, and it was terrific. Alex's little question just around who'd been in the room. I mean, I saw so many familiar faces this morning, but there's a few people who haven't been to one of these events, so welcome. My name's Dylan Flavell, I'm the Managing Director. I don't know, has anyone been the MC at an event before? Anyone been the MC at a wedding or something like that? You know that thing where you go, oh, I hope I don't lose my notes? Well, I did, just in the last couple of minutes. So we'll do our very best this morning, but I think it should be fine. This is the work that we do. So the way we're going to run our next sort of hour or so is in a couple of parts. So I'm going to spend the next 20 or 25 minutes talking to you about some of the things that we've learnt, some of the things that I've learnt, some of the research that's out there from practice as it relates to organisational culture. And I know that means many, many different things to many people in the room. So we're going to spend 20 or 25 minutes and we're going to hit you pretty fast with a bunch of things. So if we're going fast, don't worry. We've then got 2 or 3, if you want to call it a World Cafe stations, that we're going to allocate you out to, that's going to give you the chance to slow down and go just a little bit deeper, and also to rotate around the room to ask some questions about a couple of topics that we're going to talk about. So that's our format for this morning, but our first 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to run through a number of things. So I guess to start with, why did we choose this topic now? It feels harder, my perspective is it feels harder at the moment to find the right topic to choose for these events. It did used to feel easier. It felt like there was a wave of, oh, we're talking about this thing at the moment, it's employee engagement. Or there might be a year where it's, I don't know, something else around productivity or efficiency in organisations and getting leaner. But at the moment, it's probably less clear. But what is clear is that there's lots and lots of change happening in organisations. And what is also clear is that it's not clear where the focus is for many different reasons, and I'm going to share a few. And so these are the 5 things that I sort of looking around and talking to our clients at the moment felt most top of mind. You know, leaders are knowing and they're preparing for the fact that change is going to happen. So we know that's happening. We know that there's productivity challenges linked to this sort of AI work as well. And so all of those things, to my mind, mean that there's a level of, if you think about norms and behaviours being settled and set in stone, and if you like in the sort of old term being frozen, it feels like things are a bit in flux at the moment. There's a little bit more opportunity, perhaps, to create change. And we're certainly finding that in organisations, where organisations are going, hey, it's a great time for us to be thinking about this because we need something to grab hold of. So just a little bit more about these things, and I'm not going to spend loads of time on the context for why we chose this. But yeah, AI-induced disruption, I think our last talking point, or maybe it was the one before, was all about this. So many of the jobs that we have and hold and our employees are in at the moment are going to be impacted. You know, 2/3 suggest they're going to be impacted, and up to 25% of those roles either deleted or automated. So not everyone's not going to lose their job, but significant change that we know organisations are getting ready for. So it means there's a level of change, agility and adaptability as part of most cultures that's on the mind of organisations and leaders. I don't know if many of you spent a lot of time. It wasn't the most engaging read, but the Productivity Commission did lots of work last year, and they came and said, "Well, we're not really moving as fast as we might like from a productivity perspective. We're at a bit of a standstill. Not so different from many other developed countries." And there are reasons for this that relate to mobility of people in and about work, ageing workforce. There are a number of things that are contributing to that, but we know that it's top of mind for organisations. Also, slow tech adoption is another thing that organisations in Australia are seeing, and so we know there are factors that are contributing to that are linked to how we work as an organisation. This hybrid shakeout, there's no place like working from home, so we know it's working very differently for some people, and we know it's working terrifically for some people. I love staying at home on Mondays and Thursdays, or no, Mondays and Wednesdays. See, I need to get that right. We've got our couple of days, and it works really, really, really well. And some organisations and people are loving it, but some aren't. And so there's a reality that the 75% of 452 Australian HR professionals state that feeling disconnected from colleagues as being the number one problem that they're seeing with hybrid work. So, lack of connectivity and connection is a real thing. And that is leading to levels of people thinking about what they would do if they were having a forced return to the office mandate. We've seen that in the headlines a lot in the last 3 months as we got back to this new year. So, working for some, not for others. There's a level of unsettledness. Macro pressures, we've got our research partner, I4CP, so the Institute for Corporate Productivity, and they just released their sort of predictions for the year ahead. And one of their things they've been talking about is the fact that how do we get comfortable bringing our whole self to work when there are lots of extreme views or views that people have that may be held differently within individuals but also groups. And so, this idea of bringing your whole self to work and perhaps how I be myself and connect at work, whilst it's a challenge, also does present an opportunity. If we're seeing that people are feeling disconnected, work is a great place for people to feel connected and to find a new home. This idea of purpose and connectivity around a set of shared goals and objectives is a great opportunity. The last one, as I said, M&A activity uptake. So 59% of Australian CEOs are planning to execute an acquisition by 2027. We work with a number of organisations who are quietly going about a level of acquisition, and it's real. So, and we know that the role of culture in effectively, or organisations coming together effectively, is really important. So all of those things sort of led to this sort of idea that, ironically, whilst all this change is happening, it does create an environment where establishing new cultural practices is made much more possible. 10, 15 years ago, we had to go, how do we create a platform for change? Why would we need to bother? Well, it feels like people are bothering and actually are going, how do we find common ways of working again? So I think there's a sense of opportunity that sits within that we're seeing certainly with our clients, and I think some of that data supports. So, what we thought we'd do today is share a little bit about some of the myths that we see in research and practice. Little bit on methods. I'm going to ask you a few questions about that as well, and then some missteps. Now, of course, we've never been involved in any of these missteps. So, of course, many of them actually come from work that we've done that I go, gee, if we had have done that again, we'd do that very, very differently, and that wasn't so effective, or it helped, but it helped this much, not this much. So it's a learning, practice and pursuit, and in many ways some of the titling around this particular session was about the fact that it's a unwieldy sort of beast, culture. I'm sure if we were to sit down and talk to each person in this room, they'd have very different views on what it is, why it matters, how it works, how to create change. So it's a chunky topic. So bear with me as I step through a few of these, and we'll get the chance to talk more about these as we go through. So myth busting. This first one. Who knows that first one? It's, if we build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. It's Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, I think it was. So I was thinking about this as I was had this first myth in mind, and this is this myth that describing it will change it. So, yeah, really important to define your culture, but I've worked with many executive teams who want to lock themselves away in a room for long periods of time to get their elevator pitch just so neat and so perfect that it's so clear. And then if we just tell people that, it'll be done. And so that's one of the things we've noticed, is that this overemphasis on describing it is not necessarily that helpful. Not a bad thing to do, but not a culture change activity. The second thing, we saw this in a number of big reports. We had the global sort of banking sort of inquiry a couple of years ago, the Royal Commission, and this idea is that bad apples are the cause of bad cultures or things happening. So we see a lot of this, of course, and it's this idea that if we just focus on getting a good leadership development program in place, we'll have sorted it. Or if we just focus on this HR practice or policy, we'll get sorted. If we just define our values really well, it'll be fine. And or if we just find that bad leader that's not working, or get a new good one in that will fix the problem that we have with our culture. And the reality is, it's an orchard thing. It's systemic. The things that we've got listed down there are structures, processes, operating models, technology, of course, people stuff, but not just people stuff and not just value stuff. So it's a systemic piece of work that requires not the very best in all of those fronts, but it requires us to pull more than one lever. It's HR's job. I like this. I didn't put this together, but I thought, who is that? That's the business right there. He's just, not my job. I think that's the reflection. So, we often see organisations and leaders go, "Well, that's not my job. That's HR need to." Well, our culture is crap, and because, well, it's your fault. So we see that a lot, but sometimes we see the opposite, where we go as a HR function or an OD team, we want to own that thing. And our view is that it's certainly we as HR and OD professionals have a big role to play, but our role isn't necessarily in leading or being accountable for tactical behaviour change at the front line. We've got a facilitative and enabling role, and it's not helpful for the business or for us if we're seen to be leading it and accountable for it. So there's an interesting piece of definition work to go, what is our role in guiding, facilitating, supporting, enabling, setting strategy? But leaders really have a key role to be accountable, and when that's missing, we know from the research, missing in a really specific way, both in involvement and measurement, then it tends not to go anywhere. Engagement equals culture is another one that we see a lot, and we know that there's a place for both of them. But employee engagement is a measure that really looks at how people feel about the organisation they're in. Culture, a little bit different. It looks at how an organisation's working, and they predict different outcomes, different variables. Employee engagement predicts employee performance, individual performance, and likelihood to stay, as well as a few other things as well. Organisational culture looks at how the organisation works, predicts organisational outcomes like performance, profitability, growth, customer experience, risk management, those types of things, as well as being a very, very, very strong predictor of employee engagement. We prefer culture because it goes a little bit further upstream, helps you pull some of the levers that then help to push downstream. They both have a place, though, but the confusion over them and them seeing them as the same thing can be a real challenge. Culture starts with mindset. This is one that I think, as a participant, being in organisations, being someone who's gone in and being part of a culture change program that's happening, and also being a consultant and facilitator of these things, it's easy to see why this is the place, because we look at the iceberg, you go, hey, it's mindsets and attitudes. They sit at the bottom of the iceberg. It's got to be the place to start. The tricky thing is that very few people at the start of a program like the idea of someone saying, "It's the start of our culture programs, and now we want to change your mindset." So I love this quote down here from Buckminster Fuller, who's had a lot of influence on management science, but his quote is, "You can't change the way people think. All you can do is give them a tool, the use of which will change their thinking." So how do we start to think about facilitating change in a way that gives people tools or methods or approaches or ways of working that contribute to their own learning in their own space and way? So not to say the mindset work isn't important, but is it the starting place? It's an interesting question. And this last one that, because we're consultants at the outside and we're always thinking about measuring things and we've got the time and space to do that because that's what we do, it always, perplexes us a bit when we hear that. But we know it's true that there's a lot of perspectives, particularly from leaders, going, no, you can't measure culture. It's just how a place feels. And if it's just something that is a feeling, then how could you really measure it? Well, we know from lots of research over a long period of time now that it can very reliably be measured. Yep, you can define it in different ways and you can measure it in different ways. It's very measurable. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in one of our circles this morning. So a few of the myths there. I'm going to keep moving to our methods. And for this little activity, you might need to have your phone ready because we've got a little Menti survey we're going to ask in a moment. So you might just want to grab your phone out. So I'm not going to bore you with loads and loads of conversation about our methodology, but if you want our methodology, you can very easily get it because the little flyer, the A5 flyer that's sitting on your seat, has on it much content and much deeper than what we'll talk about today, including a white paper that describes our methodology in detail. So I guess the key reflection point here around method is if you look at that image or that view, there are a number of steps. So there's something about assessment, there's something about defining where you're going, there's something about how we socialise and ideate and get people involved in that work. There's something about designing and implementing some stuff that's going to create some change. There's something about monitoring progress, and then there's, hey, how do we go and how do we do something different or give this some more energy? In many ways, for many of you who have worked in organisations, I spoke to some people who've got some very different backgrounds and have worked in large program and technology implementations and all those sorts of things. The stuff up there is not that different to any methodology you'll see that's about creating change. My observation, though, is in working with organisations, particularly around culture change, is you've got to have a view to how the work might unfold over the next couple of years. If you start with just, hey, let's just get all our energy behind assessment, you spend all this sort of energy and sort of relationship capital in the organisation getting ready for that, then you do it, and then you have a pause, and you go, okay, we're there, we've done the measurement. Then you've got to go into this planning cycle, and the business lose interest. They've gone. So this idea of going, hey, how do we, rather than being platinum plated on one step, how do we get program focused? And I don't mean to reduce culture change to a program. There might be people in the room who object to that. I sort of do as well. It's work that needs to be ongoing. But if we look at it over a longer period of time, do we know the steps? How do we pace our stakeholders through it? And how do we know when we finish something where we're moving to? Really important. So that would probably be my key thought around that one. And you can see we've littered a number of stats from our State of Culture report in 2023 or early 2023, which is just showing that, we know we've got a fair way to go in this. We know we're not always assessing it or measuring it. We know we're not always doing the work to create a clear target as in where we're going. So I thought, just as a bit of a point of interest, we might have a pause from hearing me for the moment. But if you've got your Menti survey up, I'd like you to just go through and answer those questions. And I'll flick through. Essentially, the questions are about where your organisation is at on going through and doing each one of those steps. Now, I know some of you may not have been at your organisation long, you may not have visibility of that, or you, as an organisation, may not be actively involved in this work. So it might be a bit tricky for you to answer some of the questions, but that's okay. Do your very, very best. So I'll give you 20 seconds, and or I'll give you a bit longer. I'll give you 45 seconds. Okay. Maybe get our first one up. So let's have it. Has your organisation completed a culture diagnostic in the past 2 years? So there you go. So we've got yes is 14%. I think in our last take it was about 19%. So sort of similar type of range. No is about 70%, 69%, and not sure 17%. So you can see that's not necessarily the case. Now, as I said, understand that might be happening for different reasons, but it is a thing that if you wouldn't find a you would, but you wouldn't find many more talked about terms if you were to look at the AFR. Most articles, even in a really, really commercial look at a business, that we're talking about culture going right, wrong, or being a great contributor to valuation, but we still don't tend to quite have the level of propensity to measure it. So it's an interesting one. All right, next. Cool. This is getting better. So, have you got a cultural aspiration that is defined and understood? This might seem a bit counter to my myth around building it and they will come. I mean, I think it's nice to describe what it is. I think it's really important. It just needs not to be done in isolation. But 45% saying yes as an organisation they have. 40% saying no and 14% unsure. So, it's some good work being done there, but still, that step, which is a really important one that we'll talk about in a moment, and a bit more in our World Cafe circles that we'll jump into. It's a really important one that does get missed a lot, and important around how that's done. So, interesting, good work. Next one. Were leaders and frontline staff alike involved in shaping a culture plan? Yeah, this is an interesting one, and my views and our method on this has changed in the last 10 years for sure. Like, I definitely think we did a lot more top-down culture change 10, 15 years ago for sure. We're like, hey, if we can just get leaders to talk about it and get them in the room to really be doing some stuff, and we can set some aspiration and do some measurement, then they'll be great. But what we sort of realised is that it helps, it gets somewhere, but it doesn't get anywhere near as far as if we've got people actively involved in shaping and creating that. And I had a couple of those conversations this morning where they go, oh, we're doing it in different groups and it feels like it's going out there and out there and out there. And you're like, well, if you're not doing it in those groups, it's definitely going to be going out there and out there in their own way anyway. So there's there's nothing that you can control absolutely. But 40% of people saying, yep, we've involved people. About 50% people saying, no, we haven't involved people, and 12% not sure. So some interesting themes there. Next one. Yeah, this is a tricky one. It's does your organisation have a way of regularly monitoring changes in culture? So, about 19 to 20% yes, 63% no, and 19% unsure. So, it's a really important step. I think probably one of the most underestimated one. And even if I talk really, transparently, when we're even pitching for work, we try to put that in. Often clients will go, no, we don't want to do that. And I think we need to, as an industry and profession, find a better way to do that more cost effectively, because it's so important in being able to iterate and learn. It's almost like going and practicing a skill, but then never getting any feedback as to how that went. And so you go, oh, well, I assume we just keep going in the same direction. So it's a really important one in sustaining and iterating change. Next one. Is your approach to culture change action iterated regularly, so change based on experiments, learnings and successes to help scale positive change? So about 20% yes, 20% unsure and 63% no. I think it's a tricky one. Obviously different organisations have different risk appetite, but I do think we miss big opportunities to create small scale experiments to get some data, move quickly, go and have a bit of a go at over in a business unit who's got more risk appetite, or a leader that's more progressive, and learn from that. And we don't do that very well or very much, and I think collectively we can help to de-risk that a little bit by thinking about how we do things on a small scale, start to learn and start to infuse that across the organisation. So interesting. I think that was the last one. Was that the last one? Yeah, good man. Okay, so I'm not going to talk more about that, but important to have a method, ours, someone else's, your own, and have a view around how that's going to happen and play out over time. So I'm pretty much on time. I've got another 3 or 4 minutes of talking before we're going to get you into some groups. So I just want to share a few missteps. We've got them all on a page. Oh, there's one that's not there. That's okay. I can talk to it. Some of my late night iterations, of course. So the first one is this idea of a performance disconnect, that you see culture that's happening, culture work that's happening, that's not connected to the business strategy. Now, there's a bit of work to be done to do this, but we see it as probably one of the biggest missing components, where you sort of start running culture in its own sort of thing, and it might be whether it's in the form of values work or culture work, but it's not connected to the problems that the organisation's seeking to solve, and that link hasn't been made. Different cultural attributes contribute to different performance outcomes, and creating what we call a blueprint is a really important part of helping bring a level of commerciality to culture work. And it's a strange word to use. Not everyone in this organisation there might be people from not-for-profits, but I mean a level of critical thinking about the business outcomes that it needs to drive. And that, for us, is a really important piece of work that drives leadership, commitment and focus in the work that we're doing. The next one, I think we get this right quite a bit, and I say the collective we from what we see, but we still struggle at times for different reasons. Sometimes it's structural around who owns this work, but no leadership, ownership, or accountability designed into work. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you might find leaders observing or being participants of work, not having a role within that. Sometimes it might be that they're not being held accountable, and we know from some of the research from our research partner, I4CP, that is one of the biggest predictors of success of cultural change activities, that leaders have a level of accountability, and it's made specific how they will be measured around change in that space. It's an interesting one around. And also sometimes you'll see leadership work happening and culture work happening, and they're not talking to each other, or they're at different times. So not necessarily that all of them need to be right all of the time, but it's going, how do we make sure that leaders are part of this? This is part of their work. Top down and too controlled, as I shared before, I think we've definitely made changes in the way that we approach this work over the last 10 years. We sort of used to have this view that we wanted to sort of get a clear view of what was going on. We'd create a clear blueprint or aspiration, and then we'd put in place some programs that would involve people and engage people. And it worked to some extent, but what you invariably find, particularly as people want more empowerment within their role, is it doesn't engage people at a real level. And if you're not getting people involved in it, they're still going out doing whatever they're going to do, and often not what you would ideally be liking them to do within your plan. So we've very much gone to a much probably heavily weighted bottom-up approach to getting people involved in setting cultural aspiration, getting people and teams involved in deciding what they're going to do that doesn't need any steam or money or anything else. What are the work practices they can put in place now? And many of you will be doing that in different places around employee engagement and things like that anyway. But it's a really important part of going, hey, let's not be too worried about controlling it because it's going to happen anyway. Let's make sure that we have a top-down approach that gets leader support and engagement in the idea, but really cedes control to people to start creating their own future and destiny. Very, very usually when we ask leaders the questions about what they think is important in an organisation and how they go about doing something about that, the conversation with frontline blue-collar workers is pretty similar. Like, they're nearly the same conversation, not necessarily at the same level of strategic thinking, but going, what are the things we need to do more of or less of to support our customers? They're often the same thing. So this idea of needing to control it is something that sort of suggests that there's an opportunity to let some of that go. The top right one, not enough action and not quick enough. So I'm sure we've all been involved in efforts, and I absolutely have been, where we spend all the time measuring stuff, but then there's this elongated pause before we do anything because we're all taking a collective breath to go, oh God, I didn't think that was going to be like that, or that was going to be different, or now we need to manage these people over here. And so, this idea of being able to keep momentum through work, because the attention span of organisations is low. So we need to keep sort of momentum. And one of the big things we get in the way, I don't know if anyone saw or took much notice of Adam Grant's visit a few weeks ago, but he was talking about, I think it was the second score, in feedback for individuals. How do you not focus as much on the feedback you're getting, but what your response to that feedback is going to be? How you're going to go and create change about it, rather than being concerned that you're getting graded as a C or a C plus. What's your response to it? Is it an A plus response to creating change? Well, I think it's the same in this space as well. It's how do we not have leaders be so worried about what the first assessment and baseline is, and go, what's it going to be like in 6 months or 12 months? That is the score that matters. To the other point, though, that connects on to that, is that sometimes we're still seeing organisations not measure it, and for reasons that could be about haven't thought too much about this, using employee engagement. Sometimes we're seeing the opposite. It's like, oh, we're too survey fatigued. We can't complete another survey. And so I guess we've gone with that many times, and we've perhaps sometimes used qualitative data and we've cobbled things together. But if you don't measure it, it's really hard to know whether you've gone better. It's really hard to hold people accountable. And I think the other thing that we would have a strong view about this is that it's too expensive. So you need to find a way to get measurement done that's not going to burn all of your capital around your budget around culture work. It shouldn't be that expensive. So I think the market needs to move to be making this much less expensive and much more time focused on putting action in place. Last one is just this idea that the team is where change happens, and we have a strong view around that. So actually, we're for that, not against it. But sometimes when you see teams not being engaged practically in what they're going to do, it might be organisational responses. But team is where people's behaviour. Yep, sometimes it's process driven and data driven and structurally driven. We know all that sort of stuff, but it's where teams come together with that social commitment to, hey, you said you were going to do that thing, or we agreed we were going to do X, Y, and Z. That's where you start to create sort of the norms of behaviour that collectively, they'll be different around the organisation, but collectively we sort of hold each other to account in small teams. That's how humans are wired. So anything that misses that, we feel is an opportunity lost to use the social capital of a team to help reinforce behaviour. So action planning together, linking team goals to cultural attributes that we think are really important, even helping, I talked to some people doing values work today, where you help teams have their own view on what behaviours matter to them. They're still linked to the values, but might be their own iteration of that, so that they can go, oh, well, that means this for us in this client context. So I had one more there. The one more was not getting some of this work, particularly assessment and diagnostic work, aligned with strategic planning. So we definitely see that the very best results from our clients are when they're going into doing strategy and strategy planning work, and they've got their culture data with them, rather than culture data happening at a time that's got no real connectivity to when a business is planning. So that is one that we see the very best results when organisations are committed to pairing those things together.